Now, Deborah heard a podcast recently where I had the privilege of interviewing Gene. And we talked, I didn't realize it, my podcast is only 40 minutes, but we talked an hour and 15, and I could have gone for days, because I would just throw out things and he would just tell me these incredible stories about his life and where he had been. So before you give your presentation, I'm so grateful that Deborah said, would you do a little bit of interviewing of Gene? So thank you very much, Dr. Griessman, for that. You went from being a sociology and anthropology professor to being an expert on high achievement, sought after all over the world. How do you go from being a professor to being that guy?
Well, I was at Auburn University. I was head of the Department of Sociology and Anthropology there, and I had a chance to do television. First of all, Alabama Public Television. That program that I did won an award. I took it up to Atlanta, showed it to Ted Turner's people. They liked it, and so I had an opportunity to start doing programs for TBS, Ted Turner's superstation, for a number of years. I hosted television specials and eventually got my own show's primetime show called Up Close, and I interviewed celebrities. And as I was doing interviews one-on-one with very famous people, I discovered that whether I was talking to Hank Aaron or Aaron Copland, whether I was talking to Tennessee Williams or Ray Charles, whether I was talking to, say, Mary Kay, or whether I was talking to, say, well, let's think of another, Bear Bryant. I found that when I asked them, what made you successful, they answered the questions the same way, which I thought was pretty strange because there's a little bit of difference between, say, Ray Charles and Tennessee Williams, or Ronald Reagan and Mary Kay. And so I thought, this is really pretty strange that they answered the same way. And I gradually reached the conclusion that success has its own rules regardless of what you do. Whether you're managing property, or whether you're an accountant, or whether you're sales, or whether you're a nurse, or whatever you do, there are certain basic things that very successful people do. So I set out to discover what those basic principles, what those success secrets are. I wrote a book called The Achievement Factors, in which I looked at those themes, those common denominators, I call them achievement factors. And so that put me on the path to doing programs about high achievers.
I know we're going to cycle back because I know you're going to teach us today.
In fact, I'll tell you some of the things that some of the people told me when I interviewed them.
Before we do that, I want just the people to know about how you give the most acclaimed Abraham Lincoln performance, one-man show I've ever seen. And obviously, you're famous around the world for this. How do you go from being on television, Gene Griessman, to being Abraham Lincoln? How does that happen?
I think that people would be surprised if they realized that when I first started out as a university professor that I'd go around the world trying to make people think I'm somebody else, i.e. Abraham Lincoln. In fact, I'm going to get ahead of myself because one of the things that I'm going to talk about this morning about balance is discovering what you do really well. And sometimes we don't discover that till late. In fact, some people never discover what they are really good at. And so they spend their entire career working at something they have not a lot of potential for ever being great at. So it's terribly important to discover your specialty, what you're really good at. And I'll talk about that later, but I'll tell you how that happened to me. I was at Georgia Tech. I won't tell this story too often. And I was doing my programs. I was not doing Lincoln. I was doing programs on success secrets of high achievers. And I got an invitation to do a Rotary program at Ellijay. It turned out that the president of that Rotary Club was a big booster, big contributor to Georgia Tech. And I held, one of the hats I wore, I was the director of national media relations at Tech. So I took this invitation to go to Ellijay. And the president, the host, told me there's going to be someone here today who can, he's a retired multimillionaire, he's retired from the North Georgia Mountains, and he can spot the X factor in people. I said, well, what's the X factor? He said, whether a person has star quality or not. I said, well, I'd like to meet that man. So I made my presentation about high achievement. Nothing to do with Lincoln. Afterwards, I was introduced to it. And I did not ask him if he thought I had the X factor, because I was afraid he'd say no. That hurt my feelings. So I said, I understand you can pick up things in people. He said, I can. I said, well, do you pick up anything in me? He said, yes. He said, you missed your calling. Now, I'm pretty far along in my career by this time. And he's telling me I have missed my calling. He said, you made a good speech today. He said, you're a good speaker. But he said you would have been a great actor. Probably a character actor, maybe a leading man, but you would be a great character actor. Well, I'd never seen that in myself. I wasn't even in a high school play. No, never done any acting. And I think sometimes messages come to us. Somebody comes along, tells us something that maybe we didn't see, understand, and I think if we're in tune, we'll understand that that's a message for us. So I took that message, and next week I enrolled in my first acting class at the Alliance Theater School. Worked through every acting class there to try to become an actor. After I had gone through all of the classes here in Atlanta, and along the way I had decided that I would choose a character to illustrate the principles of high achievement. In other words, not just give a speech on high achievers, but do a one-man play about somebody who was a high achiever, who illustrated those principles. So I thought, well, I can't do a believable Winston Churchill. But I could do an Abraham Lincoln. Both tall, both Southern, both had a backwoods Southern accent. So I could be Lincoln. So I decided that I would create a one-man play about Lincoln, like Hal Holbrook had created a play about Mark Twain. And so going through the classes, I began to be pretty good. First programs I did for nothing. I do them in senior citizens' homes, and I do them at singles clubs or meetings at churches. Nobody's paying me anyway, so they pay me a little bit. And so after I'd gone through all the classes, I moved to L.A. so I could be in the acting community out there, because I had my goal to be the best Lincoln performer ever. That was my goal. And so all the time I was out there, I was taking classes. But the point I was making is, and it's a little story to illustrate that, is that I think that you have to discover what you have the potential to be really good at, so that you can put your time and energy in that. But I didn't see it in myself. Somebody else had to help me find it.
Wow. Can I ask you just another one, maybe one more Lincoln question, then we'll get back to it. You had the opportunity to speak like at Ford's Theater. Is that surreal? What is that like?
Of all the performances I've ever done, the one at Ford's Theater where Lincoln was assassinated was the most eerie. Because if you've been to Ford's Theater in Washington, have you ever, some of you have been there probably. If you haven't, do go. It's a special place. I'm standing on the stage, and they recreated it just the way it was the night Lincoln was killed. And I'm looking up in the box where he was seated, and I'm performing Lincoln. And I'm standing just a few feet from where John John Wilkes Booth on the stage after he shot Lincoln. It doesn't get much more surreal than that.
I know you're going to include some of the other stories, but I just want to say thank you for letting me just be a part in this little interview, just to kind of get into the presentation. And now we can't wait to hear. You've met so many wonderful people. We can't wait to hear the story. Ladies and gentlemen, ready to hear time tactics?